Please welcome one of the bravest freedom fighters in the world right now, Mr. Geert Wilders.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ingrid, for inviting me to address you people and the Swedish Free Press Society. I'm very happy to be in your midst today, and not 10, not 100, and not thousands demonstrators would keep me away from Sweden. I love Sweden and its people. One of my great heroes, Raoul Wallenberg, was a compatriot of yours. Wallenberg embodies all that is good and generous in the Swedish people. He defended the freedom and dignity of others. He protected those who had been marked for death by an evil ideology, and he gave his own life for it. And recently, the Swedish, your Minister of Integration, Mr. Erik Ullenhag, was in The Hague, in the Netherlands, on the occasion of the 100th anniversary of Wallenberg's birthday. And your minister unfortunately abused the occasion to attack my party, the Dutch Party for Freedom. Mr. Ullenhag said in Holland that in Sweden a party like mine would never be given the opportunity to influence politics. And I wonder first what these remarks had to do with Wallenberg. But I know that your minister, Mr. Ullenhag, is wrong. Like the Netherlands, Sweden and all other Western European countries need a party defending freedom. Because Sweden has the same problems as the Netherlands, as Denmark, as the rest of the Western world. We are all in the same boat. Our freedoms are in danger. Our political and especially our often leftish and liberal media establishment turn a blind eye to the largest threat to liberty in our present age. And this threat, whether we like it or not, is called Islam. Islam commands its followers to establish a worldwide Islamic state where everybody has to live according to the Sharia, the barbaric law of Islam, and where Islam opponents are marked for death. Alexander Solzhenitsyn used to say that the truth is seldom sweet. It's almost invariably bitter, end of quote. But the truth, ladies and gentlemen, the truth should be heard. And the bitter truth is that Islam is the largest threat to our freedom today. And the unpleasant truth that Islam is already all around us. And the sign of Islam's presence is visible in all the major European cities today. Also in Malmo, especially in Malmo. 25% of the population here originates from Islamic countries, the highest rate in the whole of Scandinavia. And that's why it's very good to be here, in this great city, which deserves better than it currently gets. Even the international media, from Holland to any other country in the West, have written stories about the outbursts of violence, the gang warfare, the shootings and bombing of police stations in Malmo. In a city like in this city, our message needs to be heard. Malmo should not succumb to Islam. Malmo should remain what it was throughout its history, a decent, a peaceful and a safe place for people to live, to work and raise a family, a free city. And in Malmo, we must turn the tide and show the world that the Islamization process can, in fact, be stopped. And that is why I'm here today. And it's a coincidence that today marks the final day of this year's Hajj, the Islamic pilgrimage to Mecca. This should be a symbolic moment to tell you that it's time to turn the tide, and to tell you that it can be done. But in order to turn the tide, we must first stop pretending that there is no problem, as so many politicians and so many journalists like to fool you about. We must first face the truth. We must speak the truth, so that others will know it too. And before I continue, let me make one thing absolutely clear. Whenever I criticize Islam, I am all over the world by people with often bad intentions falsely accused of hating people. And in order to avoid all these misunderstandings, let me state clearly, I criticize an ideology, not people. I do not hate anybody. I do not want to harm any human being. I totally reject any form of violence. In fact, the most important thing, the most important reason why I reject Islam is its violent nature and the fact that it's harmful to people, including its own adherents, whom we should pity rather than hate, and whom we should help to liberate themselves from the evil monster called Islam. And I have traveled the Islamic world. Before 8 years ago I got into trouble extensively. I have visited countries like Iran, Iraq, Egypt, Tunisia, Syria, Indonesia. And in my book, Marked for Death, you can read how I was overwhelmed by kindness, friendliness, and helpfulness of many of the people who are living there. They often are good people, but they are captives of Islam. So it's important to make a distinction between the people, the Muslims, and Islam. Most Muslims are moderate. Most Muslims are non-violent. But the ideology of Islam is dangerous. The moderates are the captives of the barbaric system of Islamofascism. There is, ladies and gentlemen, there is no moderate Islam. There are moderate Muslims, but there is no moderate Islam. Islam, as a matter of fact, is only a religion to a very limited extent. It's predominantly a dangerous ideology. Islam is more political than religious. Why? Because it aims for a political and Islamic state. Islam is totalitarian. It's not voluntary. It orders people who leave Islam to be killed. The best example why Islam is totalitarian is that you are not allowed to leave it if you are a Muslim. And contrary to other real religions, it also lays obligations to non-members in its society. And Islam is also dangerous because it calls on its followers to imitate Muhammad, the so-called prophet, as closely as possible. And the life and deeds of Muhammad are therefore very important to recognize. And we know a lot about the life of Muhammad from all kinds of contemporary sources. And Islam's own sources, if you study them, tell us how evil Muhammad, the example for so many Muslims, was. And we should not be afraid to talk about it. They show us that Muhammad, as a matter of fact, was a liar, was a rapist, was a mass murderer, was a pedophile. This is the example to so many Muslims today. Because Muhammad abused women, some followers of Islam believe that they are also entitled to treat women in the same way. Because Muhammad lied and cheated in order to advance Islam in his time, some followers feel entitled to do exactly the same today. Islam even has a word for it. That kind of lying is called taqiyya. Maybe you have heard of it. Because Muhammad killed his opponents, some of his followers believe and feel entitled to do exactly the same. Because Muhammad robbed non-Muslims, some of his followers feel they have the right to do the same. And this is called jihad. A few years ago, one of your Swedish newspapers interviewed the sociologist Petra Åkesson, I hope I pronounced it right, after she had conducted a study of Islamic youth here in Malmo. And Åkesson pointed out that these youngsters have been raised in a culture that extols Islamic supremacy. And as a consequence, a significant number of them regard their criminal activities against non-Muslims, against the infidels, as a right, as justified, as permitted. And I believe that we have to understand this concept. It is our duty to expose Muhammad, who wrote a book which he said had been dictated to him by an angel from a book written by Allah in heaven. The people from his hometown in Mecca, they knew Muhammad. They said he was crazy. An angry Muhammad, as you know, and it's important for me to tell you to understand, an angry Muhammad immigrated to Medina, which he conquered through taqiyya and jihad. And later he returned to Mecca and conquered it with his troops, eradicating its tradition of openness and religious tolerance. And everywhere, if you look in the history of mankind, everywhere where Islam has gained a foothold, it has brought tremendous human suffering. And of course, not all Islam followers behave like Muhammad would have done. I would never suggest that. But some of them do. Some of them do. And the more Islam gets into your country, the more violent and intolerant it becomes, and the less freedom you will get. Just take a short stroll and walk into your own city, into Malmo's Rosengard area. It is one of the areas in our Western nations where the authorities seem to have lost power, where Sharia is replacing our legal system, where it's often unsafe for non-Muslims to go. Or come with me to the Netherlands, to the Kanaleneiland district in Utrecht. I used to live there for almost 20 years, and I have seen the district degenerate. Or let us go to Paris and visit the suburbs. Or let us go to Brussels, where Islamic gangs even used Kalashnikovs to chase the police in certain neighborhoods, and where employees of the European Parliament complain that they cannot walk the streets at night. In each one of our cities, wrote the Italian journalist Oriana Fallaci shortly before she died in 2006, in each one of our cities there is a second city, a state within the state, a government within the government, a Muslim city, a city ruled by the Quran. And one thing which you certainly should not do is enter these Islamic enclaves if you are a Jew. Jews are fleeing Europe today because they no longer feel safe. And this is not just a bad omen. This is something so intolerable that it must be stopped. And it reminds me of something Raoul Wallenberg once said. He said, and I quote, "I will never be able to go back to Sweden without knowing inside myself that I've done all a man could do to save as many Jews as possible." Wallenberg cared about the Jews, and so should we. Sweden, as the Netherlands, should be a place where Jews are safe. But the more Islamic our countries become, the more hostile it will and have become to the Jewish community. And hence, while not all the believers in Allah and Muhammad turn violent, the truth is that some of them do. And they do so because Islam, the ideology, incites them to. And we should not close our eyes for reasons of false political correctness to this reality. If we do so at our own peril. The more Islam one gets in a society, the less civilized it becomes, and the less free it becomes. It is no coincidence, ladies and gentlemen, it is no coincidence that all the Islamic states in the world demand today that freedom of speech be curtailed and that criticism of Islam and its prophet should be forbidden. They even ask the United Nations to act on that. And as I said, because there is no such thing as a moderate Islam, the Islamization of our society is a very dangerous threat. The Islamization of our societies is driven by immigration from Islamic countries. Muhammad himself, as we remember, conquered Medina through the method of immigration, or hijrah, as it's called in Islam. And we have to stop the immigration to our countries from Islamic countries. We have to halt the process of the Islamization. Because we see now all over Europe, we see mosques, we see Islamic centers, we see halal shops. They are all proliferating. In any major Western European city, you will encounter numerous women in headscarves and burqas. And I even read that in Lars Hedegaard's country, Denmark, you can find an escaped prisoner in a burqa. This is Europe today, and we should not accept it anymore. Open the pages of our newspapers, and you will read horrific stories about women being trampled, female genital mutilation and honor killings in our own backyards. And we should not accept this any longer. Winston Churchill, confronted with Nazi tyranny, said, we all remember that, never give in. Never, 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 in nothing great or small, large or petty, never give in except to convictions of honor and good sense. And this motto of Churchill should be the motto of the free world. It certainly is my motto. It should be painted in bright letters on the walls on also Malmo's town hall. Never give in. Never give in nothing great or small. Because if the free world gives in to the demands of Islam, it will perish and all our freedoms will be extinguished. And I know that last month, a mosque in the Stockholm district of Botkyrka received permission to broadcast Islamic prayer from its 32-meter minaret. And we should once again not accept that. Ismail Okur, the chairman of this Botkyrka Islamic Association in Stockholm, said, we want to have Islamic and religious freedom. But ladies and gentlemen, Islam is not a genuine religion. Islam itself does not even allow religious freedom. It does not allow the choice for people to reject Islam. It orders that people who leave Islam, that apostates, that renegades, should, as a matter of fact, be killed. And the fact that the Islamic prayer call is not heard on the streets does not in any way limit the freedom for Muslims. They are free to believe whatever they want. In countries like ours, they are free to say whatever they want. But this does not include the right to blast through loudspeakers over our cities to hear for us all, even in the privacy of our own homes, the message that there is no God but Allah and Muhammad is the messenger of Allah. If they are allowed to shout this Islamic battle cry, because it is a battle cry through loudspeakers, others should be allowed to shout through their own loudspeakers from their own highest towers to the whole world, including the privacy of their houses, that Allah, as a matter of fact, is a false God, that Muhammad was a fraud, and that Islam is a threat. But you know what would happen if someone would really start doing this? If someone would shout those truths from a rooftop in, let's say, nearby Rosengard. Muslims would take offense. If we would do the same as they do, they would take offense. You know all what happened to your own countryman that I respect a lot, the artist Lars Vilk, who drew a cartoon of Muhammad. He was marked for death. Al-Qaeda offered $150,000 for his assassination. He was assaulted. His house was arsoned. And an Islamic suicide bomber who killed himself and injured 2 people, innocent people in Stockholm on December 11, 2010, said that all Swedes would be made to pay for this. He said, and I quote, "for their foolish support of the pig Vilks." And Lars Vilks, ladies and gentlemen, you know it better than I do, now lives under permanent police protection, just as I have been living for 8 years under permanent police protection, because the so-called followers, peaceful followers of Muhammad, want to assassinate me for criticizing Islam. And that is why all the security and all the demonstrations are here today. But let no one tell you, let no one fool you that Islam respects freedom. Freedom and Islam are incompatible, totally incompatible. And let no one tell you and fool you that Islam is a religion of peace. Islam, ladies and gentlemen, is an ideology of violence. And let no one tell you that you should tolerate the intolerant. We have done that enough. No more tolerance for the intolerant. Listen what Karl Popper, the great liberal philosopher, had to say. Karl Popper said, "Unlimited tolerance leads to the disappearance of tolerance. If we extend unlimited tolerance even to those who are intolerant to us, if we are not prepared to defend the tolerant society against the onslaught of the intolerant, then the tolerant will be destroyed, and tolerance with them." And he could not be more right. So today we have to make a stand. We have to draw a line. We have to say no more mosques. We have enough mosques in our society. No more Islamic schools. They are centers of subversion. No more immigration of Islamic countries. Stop it. Enough Islam. And all criminal immigrants with dual nationality have to be expelled. We have to draw a red line. If you assimilate to our society, if you behave according to our values, to our constitution, to our laws, then you are welcome to stay. And if you don't, there is the door, and we will send you packing. Ladies and gentlemen, today Islam has the audacity and the arrogance to tell us that we, its victims, are not tolerant enough against Islam. Islam is telling us that it will not accept criticism of Islam anymore. And recently, we all remember that, on 9/11, an American ambassador was tortured and murdered because one of his countrymen, a Coptic Egyptian-born American citizen, had made a movie about Muhammad. And unfortunately, many Western leaders and media seem to be in the grip of a cowardly appeasement mentality which is harmful to our Western liberties. Martin Schulz, the President of the European Parliament, condemned, and I quote, not only the content, but also the distribution of such a movie. And Mr. Schulz will be one of the 3 EU leaders who will travel to Oslo shortly to accept this year's Nobel Peace Prize. That is the guy who said that he did not want for a movie who was critical about Islam, whatever you think about the movie, to be distributed anymore. And President Obama, another Nobel Peace Prize winner, called the movie crude and disgusting. And he added, and I quote President Obama, "The future must not belong to those who slander the Prophet Muhammad." And with all those cowardly statements of Western leaders, the leaders that should be the leaders of the free world, such as the Turkish Prime Minister Erdogan, who are today pressuring the United Nations for an international treaty against blasphemy by which they want to restrict our freedom of speech. Because blasphemy for them means not criticizing Islam. And instead of our leaders forcibly speaking out in favor of freedom of speech, instead of standing firm, our leaders, for our liberties, instead of following Churchill's example by never giving in, nothing great or small, Western politicians are cowards and cower to Islamic sensitivities by stating how offended they all are by the movie of a private individual in Los Angeles. And meanwhile, a Pakistani government minister offered a bounty of $1 million for the killing of the maker of that movie. And I have not heard any Western political leader to complain about that, talking about double standards. And when last March, your organization, the Swedish Free Press Society, was established, Mr. Schüler, the editor of the paper called Dagbladet, criticized you. He wrote in his newspaper, and I quote, "Since words are neither neutral nor innocent, there have to be limits to free speech." This is what this guy said. And I'm sorry, Mr. Schüler, but as long as people do not call for violence, they should be allowed to say whatever they like. And this is what I want in all our Western constitutions, a clause similar to the American First Amendment. I defend the right of every imam to express his disapproval of our liberties and democracy. I even defend the right of every imam to be against our freedom of speech, or Christianity, or Judaism, or have to have something against gays and women, or our culture, or our values. He can do that. He can say whatever he likes. But in return, ladies and gentlemen, in return, I demand the right that everyone is allowed to express his opinion about Islam in any way he sees fit. It's a toekomst. And since Islam does not grant us our freedom, it should not be given the freedom to rob us of our liberties. My friends, as I said, the truth is bitter and unpleasant. But we should not shirk from our responsibilities. We must say what we have to say, and we must do what we have to do. Because if we do what we have to do, there will be hope. And we can still turn the tide. I'm positive we can still turn the tide of the Islamization. And we can do so by appealing to the loyalty of our people, to their identity, and to their national freedom. We can stop Islam by rallying around our national flag and by defending our national identity. It's very important, our national identity, because our nation states are the embodiment of our liberties and our freedom. And let us defend our liberties and our freedom by defending our own nation states. And Europe's Islamization, it's not only a Swedish and a Dutch problem, it's a problem of Europe. And Europe's Islamization stems from the cultural relativism which during the past decades has undermined our national resolve. Cultural relativist dictates that all cultures are equal, equally morally and valuable. And if all cultures are equal, it follows that the state, that's a logical consequence, cannot promote any specific culture or value, even when it's the culture of its own people. And therefore I believe that cultural relativists deny that immigrants should assimilate, since that would champion European culture over the immigrants' culture. And they, the cultural relativists, they tell us that Islamic newcomers who settle in our cities and in our countries and in our villages, that they get the message, you are free to violate our norms and values, since we believe that your culture is as good as ours. And ladies and gentlemen, this is a lie. This is not true. Cultures are not equal. Our culture, based on humanism, on Christianity, on Judaism, is far better than the barbaric Islamic culture. And we should be proud of our culture. We should be proud of our culture. We should be proud of our identity. And we are certainly not belonging to an Islamic culture. The cultural relativists are, as a matter of fact, the facilitators of Islam. They parrot the Islamic taqiyya statement. They call us xenophobes and accuse us of hate speech. They drag us to court. People like myself, people like my friend Lars Hedegaard from Denmark, but many others as well, have been subjected to endless time, energy and money consuming trials for speaking the truth about Islam. Luckily, both Lars and I have both been acquitted, but others who criticized Islam were not so lucky. And the combination of taqiyya and cultural relativism is the most dangerous threat to the Western freedom. Ladies and gentlemen, these cultural relativists are also transferring our national sovereignty to Brussels. And I'd like to make this important point. They tell us that the nation states are dangerous relics from the past. They tell us that the European Union is needed in order to avoid a war. Even the Oslo Nobel Committee is saying this. And the cause of the Second World War, as we all know, was not the existence of a nation state. The cause of the Second World War was the disgusting Nazi ideology. And the remedy against totalitarianism is not building a European superstate. We cannot safeguard our liberties by robbing our countries of their sovereignty and transferring it to faraway Brussels. Because you know what would happen then. We get cultural relativists, such as your own Cecilia Malmström, who impose uniform policies to all our nations, for instance, by throwing our borders open to have even more immigrants from other countries. And Mrs. Cecilia Malmström belongs to the same party as Minister Uhlenhaag. And I wrote her a letter earlier this year inviting her to visit our immigration neighborhoods in the Netherlands. But she did not answer. And I can understand. I can really understand why you sent her to Brussels, but now we are stuck with her, and I don't like that so much. My friends, people like Mrs. Malmström seem to want to rob us of our identity. But without our own identity, there can be no liberty. Without our own nation state, there can be no real national political freedom. A soul needs a body. It's as simple as that. And the spirit of our political liberty cannot flourish outside the body of the nation state. The nation state is the political body in which we live. And that is why we must preserve and we must cherish the nation state, so we can pass it through, together with liberty and democracy, to our children. And if Sweden wants to survive, it should remain Sweden, and it should remain proud being Swedish. We must be good patriots. Patriots, by some, is branded as fascism, by, for instance, the cultural relativist. But patriotism, of course, is no fascism. On the contrary, every democrat, every defender of freedom must, by definition, be a patriot. And Europe is a cluster of nations. And the strength of Europe is diversity. Uniformity is a characteristic of Islam, not of Europe. Islam, as we know, eradicated the national identities of all the people it conquered in the past. If it's the Coptic identity of Egypt, the Indian identity of Pakistan, the Assyrian identity of Iraq, the Persian identity of Iran, they were all wiped away, cracked down upon, or discriminated against until this very day today. Islam, ladies and gentlemen, wants all nations to be replaced by what they call the Ummah, the common identity of the nation of Islam, to which we all have to be subservient, and to which we all our national identities have to vanish. And do not let the Swedish identity be swept away by the Ummah. As a national identity ties an individual to an inheritance, to a tradition, to a loyalty, to a culture. National identity is an inclusive identity. It considers everyone to be equal, whatever his religion or race, who is willing to assimilate into a nation by sharing its fate and the future of its people. And the Brussels bureaucrats and the leftist intellectuals consider patriotism a dangerous relic from the past. So they oppose Europe's national identities. But so does Islam, which does not want the faithful to assimilate and adopt another loyalty than the loyalty to Islam and to the Ummah. And there is the problem of so many immigrants in our societies. This message, ladies and gentlemen, is one of which the Eurocrats do not want to hear. But it's the truth. Without self-governance, without self-determination, there will be no preservation of our identity. And if we don't know that, we can never win the fight against the Islam. My friends, we need to give political power back to the nation state in the name of our freedom, in the name of democracy, in the name of human dignity. We need a resurgence of our national pride, a love of our own country and institutions. And by defending these nation states, we defend our own identity and our liberty. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, it is time to act. We must make haste. Time is running out for Sweden, for Holland, for Germany, for the free Western world. As Ronald Reagan said, we need to act today to preserve tomorrow. And I like to sum it up with a short summary of 5 things I believe we need to do in order to preserve our freedoms. First, as I said, we must defend freedom of speech. It is the most important of all our liberties. We have to have an American kind of First Amendment in our own Constitution. Second, we need to stop the biggest disease of Europe today, cultural relativism. In my own country, I proposed that a clause be included in our Constitution stating that the dominant culture in the Netherlands is based on the Judeo-Christian and humanist principle. If we don't know who we are, we can never find out what we are not. Third, we must stop the Islamization. More Islam means less freedom. We have enough Islam in our societies. So we must stop the immigration from Islamic countries. We should stop one more mosque to be built in our societies. We should close down all Islamic schools. Fourth, we must restore the supremacy and the sovereignty of the nation state that I just spoke about. And finally, we should all help, it's our duty to help the state of Israel. Israel is the nation state of the Jewish people. Israel is in jihad's front line. Israel is a beacon of light in an area of total darkness. Israel is fighting our fight. We should help Israel survive, not only for them, but also for ourselves. My friends, if we stop speaking the truth, however unpleasant it might be, all will be lost. In a speech at the United Nations Plaza Millennium Hotel in New York, last September 11th, George Igler, the director of the British free speech think tank called Discourse, remembered his audience of what happened inside Flight 11, the plane, as you know, that was hijacked by Mohammed Atta and his gang and flown into the North Tower of the WTC on the fateful morning of 9/11/2001. Just be quiet and you will be okay. Just be quiet and you will be okay. That is what the terrorist Atta told the passengers on board of the hijacked plane. My friends, we know from that terrible experience of that passengers of Flight 11 that we will not be okay if we remain quiet. On the contrary, we are doomed if we remain quiet. We must speak out. We must speak out with all our might against those who want to silence us. We have to tell the truth, loud and clear, about the true nature of Islam. This totalitarian ideology which wants to Islamize us and impose its will on the entire world. We have to expose the lie which is called cultural relativism. We must struggle every day again against the rising tide of Islamization, even when the cultural relativists in media and governments succumb to it. If we fail, we will lose everything. Our freedom, our identity, our democracy, our rule of law, all our liberties, beginning the most important of all, which is the freedom of speech. Ladies and gentlemen, the West is in danger, but we can still prevail, even when we are insulted, even when we are harassed and intimidated, even when they take us to court for speaking the truth, even when they mark us for death for stating the truth and an opinion about Islam. We must never be silenced. We must speak out. Never be silenced. Never. Thank you very much and good luck.